Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Bible in a Year podcast, a resource from Enter the Bible. Journey with us through the books of the Bible, discovering more about Scripture and how it shapes our lives today. I'm Katie Langston.
And I'm Kathryn Schifferdecker.
And today we are delighted to be joined by a very dear friend, Michael Chan. He is the Vice President for Mission and Inclusion at Concordia College in Moorhead, Minnesota. Prior to this, he was Associate Professor of Old Testament at Luther Seminary in St. Paul. He holds a PhD from Emory University and is a graduate of Luther Seminary and Pacific Lutheran University and is the host of the Gospel Beautiful podcast. Hello, Michael. Welcome.
Hey, good to see you both. This is going to be fun.
Yeah.
The Book of Daniel.
Yeah,
Absolutely,
thanks for joining
yes.
us. This episode is about the Book of Daniel, which I think a lot of us remember from Sunday school. There's a lot of great stories in the Book of Daniel, but there's a lot of other things, kind of some unusual, shall we say, things in the Book of Daniel as well. So, Michael, could you give us, first of all, just a quick summary or outline of the Book of Daniel?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Daniel is a relatively short book, 12 chapters long, and I think the best way to summarize it is that it's bifurcated by genre. So chapters 1 through 6 contain court tales. We sometimes call them tales of Jews in the courts of foreign kings. We can maybe talk about that later. And then chapters 7 through 12 are apocalypses, and that's another genre, kind of visionary genre that's highly symbolic and that basically involves a person receiving a revelation where the curtain that divides the physical world that we see with our five senses from the sort of broader cosmic or spiritual world, that curtain gets pulled away. And the person receiving the revelation gets to see that, wow, what's happening in this world is more than just what my five senses can see.
Yeah.
So that's one way to kind of summarize the book.
Cool. And what would you say is the message of the book in a few sentences, if you could do that?
You know what I think I might do is do it in a few verses. And so I'm going to read from chapter 2, verses 20 through 23. This is a kind of revelation that Daniel receives, and he receives a revelation and then offers these words of praise to Yahweh. Daniel said, "Blessed be the name of God from age to age, for wisdom and power are his. He changes times and seasons, deposes kings, and sets up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what is in the darkness, and light dwells with him. To you, O God of my ancestors, I give thanks and praise, for you have given me wisdom and power, and if you have now revealed to me what we asked of you, for you have revealed to us what the king ordered." And so really the theological core, I would say, of both sides of the book of Daniel is this notion of Yahweh as a God who changes times and seasons, deposes kings and sets up kings, and gives wisdom and knowledge to the wise. And I think that verse binds together both sides of the book. Because the figure of Daniel and also his three friends, whom we know as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they are experiencing history, but they also know that it's part of a bigger story. And that's the wisdom. And the one source of hope that they bring to their dire situation is that Yahweh changes times and seasons. It's going to be hard for now, but we know that at some point the seasons will change.
Yeah. Cool.
So you talked about these two genres that make up the Book of Daniel. Can you say a bit more about those, and also what court are they in? Like what's the literary setting of this book? What century are we talking about?
Yeah, so the literary setting for this book, at least for the first 6 chapters, the Babylonian exile, so the exile, the king most frequently named is Nebuchadnezzar. So this is Nebuchadnezzar the Great, Nebuchadnezzar II, the king whose armies are charged or, responsible for leveling Jerusalem or conquering Jerusalem and then exiling Jews in a number of waves. And so that's the kind of primary literary setting. And the idea is that Daniel and his friends are kind of upper crust kids who were exiled, and they're also quite smart. They're educated as Babylonians and given Babylonian names, in fact, and then they serve in the court of foreign kings. This was a common practice in the ancient Near East to have foreigners, at least well-educated foreigners, serve in this kind of a way. So that's the setting, is the exile. Yeah.
Well, Esther, she was serving in a very special way, but that's another example, right?
Yes, service is the right word, and we could think of other words. And we could think of other words too, right? She was not there by choice.
Right.
She was not there by choice.
Right. No, she was not.
No, you're right to point to Esther because that's part of this bigger genre of Jews in the courts of foreign kings. Canonically, the earliest is probably Joseph.
Right, of course.
Who is very similar, also wise, dreams and, visions and all those kinds of things. But then, of course, Esther falls into that category, and especially Daniel.
Huh.
So,
yeah, cool. So it's time for our favorite part of the episode, which is to play Bible Bingo. Woohoo! And you have given us 5 concepts, words, people, places, historical context that would be on your bingo card as you read the book of the Bible. So we're going to kind of go through these in semi-rapid succession. So the first one you have is eunuch.
Yeah. Well, okay. So part of the reason I chose eunuch is I'm trying to be a little bit silly, and also not partly because the book of Daniel is a hilarious book. Yeah. And is intended to be so, not unlike the book of Esther.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And Jonah and other kind of books. They all have this layer of humor to them that is easily missed when you're just reading it on the page. Mm-hmm. Like an oral performance is easier to communicate humor and absurdity and all of that stuff. But eunuchs are effectively castrated males who are then enslaved and brought to serve in the courts of foreign kings. This was a practice that we, at least in text, know goes back to at least the second millennium in the ancient Near East. And so it is possible, I'd say likely, that Daniel and his friends are eunuchs. One of the reasons I say that is because the person in there that is in charge of them in chapter 1 is the chief eunuch. And so there's at least some possibility there that Daniel and his friends are eunuchs. At the very least, they are slaves, like eunuchs would have been. They're enslaved by the king and forced to work, under threat of death.
Wow, I had never heard that before.
Yeah, the idea is that eunuchs can't have families, obviously, and so their loyalty is to the king, right? Is that? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if I'm remembering right, in the oldest text, they were often found in the harems, because the thought would be that they would not be tempted by, sort of life in the harem.
Ladies.
Right. They wouldn't be tempted by those things and would show, as you say, Kathryn, like exclusive loyalty to the king. No children, no divided loyalties. Their only loyalty would be the king. So.
Huh. Boy, wow. I'm going to have to go back and delete and replace all of the pictures that I saw of them, super buff, kind of manly. Anyway. Okay. Wow. I had never heard that.
It's a possibility, right?
The
book doesn't. Yeah, the book doesn't claim it explicitly, but the fact that they are put in charge of the chief eunuch, and there's some linguistic ambiguity there, to be sure, but it is at least a strong possibility that Daniel and his friends are eunuchs. Of course, we don't hear about any children, right? From Daniel,
or spouses, or
anything.
Yeah. Okay. Wow. Cool. Okay. Next term on the bingo card is apocalypse.
We touched on this a little bit. This is a literary genre that is found in chapters 7 through 12. Christians may know it best from the book of Revelation, which is literally, Revelation is a translation of apocalypsis, which is the word for apocalypse. It's a genre in which the curtain dividing the reality of our 5 senses from kind of the cosmic reality of where angels and demons and all kinds of crazy cosmic creatures live. The apocalypse pulls that curtain back and lets the person receiving the revelation see the bigger story of history that's happening. And Daniel functions in that way as the recipient of revelation on both sides of the genre divide in Daniel.
Cool. Antiochus IV Epiphanes.
Yeah, Antiochus IV lived after the time of Alexander the Great. So Alexander the Great conquers Palestine in 333, and then after he dies at a young age, after conquering the world in his 30s, we're all way behind.
I know. Darn it. What have I done?
I missed that.
Yeah, what have you done?
40.
That boat is long gone.
I've not conquered a single territory.
So after he dies, his kind of vast kingdom going, stretching from the Indus Valley all the way over to Greece and Macedon gets divided up among generals, advisors, and different people. Antiochus IV is a descendant of the Seleucid dynasty, of one of those people who took over after Alexander the Great. He is uniquely remembered for engaging in really religious persecution against Jews around Sabbath practices and other religious practices. He lived in the later 200s and then died in the 160s, if I'm remembering the date correctly. During this time of persecution, the Jews in and around Jerusalem weren't, like I said, weren't permitted to do Sabbath, and like the altar in Jerusalem was desecrated and all this, and it resulted in a revolt that we now call the Maccabean revolt. And so Antiochus IV is remembered for that. What's interesting, if you remember back to our conversation about the literary genre, this is a long way from the courts of Babylon.
Right, yeah.
Chronologically, right? We're hundreds of years into the future. But that is, this act of persecution is really the historical background behind the apocalypses in 7 through 12. And so what that means is that this short little book, Daniel 1 through 12, really covers history from the 6th century all the way to the 2nd, like roughly 400 years. And so that's kind of remarkable, the scope that it is, given how short of a book, we have before us.
So you're saying the second half of the book is kind of in response to that,
primarily,
the crisis of that persecution there.
Primarily, yeah.
And it's probably, even the first part of the book then is maybe saying, hey, here's how we're faithful in a time like this where we're being persecuted.
That's an interesting way to think about it, Katie, for sure. Yeah, that's an interesting way to think about it. It offers examples, right?
Sure. Yeah. Cool. Resurrection is the next term on our bingo card.
Yeah, this is an interesting topic. So resurrection is, of course, an important doctrine for Christians, but we have to ask the question, where did it come from? And in fact, Dr. Schifferdecker's doctoral supervisor has written extensively on sort of the early origins of resurrection theology, and that is absolutely true. That it doesn't come out of nowhere. To be clear, it comes out of these deep impulses that Yahweh, the God of the Israelites, is faithful beyond death, that faithfulness extends beyond death. But the notion of resurrection is this happens kind of after a time of judgment, and then when people are resurrected, they're sorted into the righteous and the unrighteous. That very specific belief seems to have its earliest instantiation here in Daniel chapters 11 through 12, at least its clearest and earliest instantiation there. So it's resurrection followed by judgment. That schematic that Christians sort of assume in their eschatology is first, as far as I can tell, expressed here.
I didn't know that.
And it's tied to the persecution under Antiochus IV. It's interesting the way that resurrection and this instance of persecution are really deeply intertwined in Daniel. They're also intertwined in 2 Maccabees 7, where you have the famous story of the mother and her 7 sons. It's actually Martin Luther loved this story, even though he didn't like the book of 2 Maccabees all that much. For him, this was the only recoverable story. If you go back and read his translation intros, that's basically what he says. But in the story, the 7 sons are going to be killed by Antiochus, and their mother, of course, is there and forced to endure all of this. And many of the sons will throw resurrection back into the face of the king and say, you can take these hands, but I will get them back, effectively.
Wow, yeah.
So it's kind of remarkable, right?
Yeah, wow. Yeah. Well, and that's kind of some of the early Christian martyrs. Their courage came from their confidence in the bodily resurrection as well. So that's
yes,
it's powerful. It's a powerful teaching. Okay. Cool. Then the last term on our bingo card is Belteshazzar.
Yeah. So Belteshazzar is Daniel's Babylonian name, and it comes up in chapter 1. The reason I wanted to bring it up is because it shows that Daniel and his friends were really forced to live a dual identity. The anthropologist James Scott will talk about living on stage and off stage, that the cultures that are colonized or dominated have to figure out how to have an on-stage presence and voice and identity, and an off-stage presence, voice, and identity. And that's what it is for Daniel. It's reflected in his name, that he has a court name, and then he, of course, has his given kind of Hebrew name as well.
Yeah, that's cool.
I mean, his court name literally has the name of Bel in it, which is an alternative name for Marduk, the god of Babylon.
Wow, yeah. So it's very much, and if he is enslaved, like you were saying, it's been imposed on him, kind of against his will. I mean, not kind of, certainly against his will.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, thank you. That was a very insightful Bible bingo round. You are our lucky winner for today.
I love it. I win at this game every time.
You do. Your prize is in the mail. Prize is in the mail.
Being with you is the prize. It is enough.
Oh, that's nice.
I'll take that.
It's true. It's true.
Thank you. So this may be a little redundant, but what's weird or interesting about the book of Daniel?
It's all weird. It's all interesting.
Totally. It is a weird book, man.
It is. It's a bizarre book. I mean, I'd say the most bizarre parts of the book, I would say, are the apocalypses, right?
Yeah.
Even though, like, Kathryn, you know this, that like in the time of the Dead Sea Scrolls, you know, the it's all the way up to the 1st century BC. Like apocalypses are everywhere in 1st century, and not just in 1st century Judaism, but especially there. Apocalypses are all over the place. These visionary quests, these visions that give you a view of history and a cosmic understanding of what's happening. They're all over the place. And even early Christianity has them too. Like I think that the apocalypse of Abraham, I think, is a Christian apocalypse. And so it's a genre that would have been common during the time of Jesus, during the time of Paul and all the authors of the New Testament. But for us, it is not common. And so it's a very strange kind of text to approach and to even know what to do with, because it's full of all these strange images of monsters and creatures that you would never see on Earth, but only see like in like a Godzilla movie or something like that.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and a lot of symbolic language and not quite sure what represents what. And as you say, monsters and beasts and horns and it is.
Isn't that kind of by design, like baked into the genre is like embedded critiques, let's say, of the empire or the government, and so it's kind of like sneaky political literature as well. I feel like I remember reading that in seminary. Is that real?
It is absolutely a critique, right? I think it's a critique and an observation. Like it's a critique that these empires are voracious, they're violent, they're scary. But also, I would say that they are beyond human control. And here I'm nodding a little bit, gesturing a little bit, Kathryn, to your work in Job with Leviathan, where it's like Leviathan is a scary thing that no human creature can tame. And I think that is also true in the apocalypses, that these monsters, like they are there and they are scary, but like the only one who can turn the season, right, is Yahweh. And so what are you going to do? Except endure like Daniel and his friends do.
Right.
Yeah.
What memorable verses, chapters, or passages would you want to kind of be short to address?
The one that I lifted up earlier in chapter 2 is, I think, it maybe isn't the most memorable, but I think it's kind of a key to the book. I think it helps us see the book in a holistic and theological way. I would say that the court tales, especially chapters 2 and 3, are just delightful to read. I think the way that the king is depicted as this like giant child, not unlike Ahasuerus and Esther, is so memorable.
Yeah, that's true.
So you got as part of those court tales, just to remind folks, so you've got like Daniel in the lion's den and the 3 men in the fiery furnace, and
then there's the fourth man in the furnace too, right?
Mm-hmm.
He goes down there.
Yeah.
I might remember.
Yes. The kind of angelic heavenly being who saves them. Yeah.
And that Christians kind of have read that have they read that as Jesus, or was that Mormons? Tell me.
No, I think there's a tradition. I think there's a tradition of sort of seeing it certainly as a divine, semi-divine being or some kind of being. Yeah.
Probably not.
One thing we forgot to talk about is that this is a bilingual book.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so you wouldn't notice this necessarily reading it in English, but this book is written in both Hebrew and Aramaic. The Aramaic sections start in chapter 2, and it's a little bit strange. It's just kind of mid-sentence. You just drop into Aramaic, and Hebrew and Aramaic are written differently enough that you can tell, like what's going on. It's probably also the author's way of showing off a little bit. It's probably also the author's way of nodding to Daniel and his friends' dual identity, because they would have grown up knowing Hebrew, but Aramaic was kind of the lingua franca of the court of the time. And so they would have likely, in international discourse, would have spoken Aramaic so that everybody could understand what the other's doing. They didn't have ChatGPT to help them, translate all these things.
All right, Michael, what's one key theme that you'd want people to look for as they read the book of Daniel?
I'll do what Jesus did and offer 2 answers, love the neighbor and love God. But what I'll say though is that I think it's hope and humor together.
That's nice.
I think both of those live together. Like the humor isn't just to like make people laugh. It is that like our solidarity is built when we have a common enemy. It's
right.
part of being human.
Yes.
So I think the humor is there to build solidarity, but I think it's a little bit of a Trojan horse. It also carries hope with it. And so those are the themes I'd lift up.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, it's hard to despair when you're laughing, right?
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's laughter and crying are pretty close together.
They sure can be.
We have this thing called gallows humor, right? And there's probably a little bit of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, Michael, this has been wonderful. Always our kind of final question, how might you describe this book in 7 words or less?
Daniel offers hope in a world of cruelty. And this gets back to what you said, Katie, about the monsters of empire. Like whether it's empire or any number of like dynamic in the world, hatred, tribalism, like just because an empire dies doesn't mean the cruelty does, right? Like it just pops up. It's like a hydra, right? It just pops up somewhere else. And empire is not the only problem. It's just humanity, right? Like cruelty is a fruit of humanity. And so I would say it tries to offer hope in the thick of that from a place of being disempowered.
Right. It's like when you don't have any political power.
And what is the hope grounded in, Michael?
Well, for Daniel, the hope was grounded in that belief that like only Yahweh alone can change the times and seasons. Now we have to think about that message and be like, is that really, like, how does that translate into the modern day when we have like democracy and when we get to vote and when people are far more empowered, at least more so than they were probably in Daniel's time, at least in our own country, there's a different level of empowerment. And so we might want to say like the times and seasons could maybe change in other ways too, but maybe the hope is in the fact that they can change.
Yeah.
Well, but I do think like, there are times when I look at kind of the vastness of and yes, we do live in a democracy and my vote has, a tiny, tiny impact. But you sort of look at things that are going on in the world that seem bad and scary and uncontrollable and like really recognizing it is out of my hands and it really is like decided I want to create a bumper sticker that says, "Don't immanentize the eschaton."
Say that again.
Great.
Don't immanentize the eschaton, which means don't like try to bring about the end of the world now or try to. I think so often we put our ultimate hope in our politicians, in our culture. Mm-hmm. We turn everything into a clash of civilizations, good and evil. This is the Flight 93 election. You know what I mean? Like these kinds of things. And like ultimately God is going to take care of the ultimate things. And what we have to do is what's in front of us right now. And so I do think there is some like recognizing that we can't do it all and we can't change the universe. We can only do the thing that's in front of us.
Yeah, you know this, Michael, from your time at Luther, but we're fond of talking about participating in God's mission, right? The church doesn't have a mission. God has a mission and has a church to, to help work on that mission. Yeah. Anyway, to participate. Well, Michael, thank you so much for joining us again and for illuminating this rather weird but also humorous and profound book of Daniel. Thank you so much for your wisdom on that.
Thanks for the invitation. Always fun to be with the two of you.
Yeah, likewise. And thank you to our listeners for listening again to this episode of the Bible in a Year podcast from Enter the Bible. Check out more great resources on the Bible at enterthebible.org. Whether you're listening on your favorite podcast app or watching on YouTube, we appreciate your following with us. You can get more great resources like this, conversations, reflections, commentaries, courses, anything that you could need as you dive in and enter the Bible with curiosity and faith. If you enjoyed this podcast, please rate and review or like and subscribe. And of course, the very best compliment you can pay us is to share this podcast with a friend. Until next time.